Is there a person on earth who hasn't experienced fear at one time or another? Sadly, there are many people whose whole lives have been sculpted, structured, molded by their fears. They've unnecessarily lived imprisoned lives by what seemed very real, the fears that appeared to be so real to them. If they had just asked themselves, what's the worst possible outcome of this fear? What's the worst thing that could happen? And think it through, they might have been able to extricate themselves from that situation, from that mindset. There was one man who hid in his home for 32 years. Janus Russ, that was his name, and he feared punishment for his wartime activity in support of the Nazis. He was a German fellow. Russ says that he used to cry. He used to break into tears when he heard happy voices outside of the house. But the poor man could not even show up at his own mother's funeral because he was so fearful. Russ was just a young shoemaker when he went into hiding at his sister's farmhouse in June 1945. His presence was finally discovered 32 years later. He told a reporter, if I hadn't been discovered, I would have remained in hiding. I'm so happy that they discovered me. I don't think anything happened to him after 32 years, my words. But throughout those years, Russ had made himself a prisoner of his fear. He looked down at the village in the valley and just longed for all that he had missed, how much his life had been impacted by that fear. You know, Ann Landers, that's a common, a very well-known name, the advice columnist, received over 10,000 letters a day before her death in 2002. And when someone asked, well, what's the most common problem that people wrote you about? She said without any hesitation, fear. Fear. Now, these days we're reading and also hearing on the news about Janus Hastert, who was the longest serving Speaker of the House of Representatives. He was a Speaker for 8 years. He was elected to the speakership, among other reasons, because he didn't have any skeletons in his closet, or so they thought, because the Republicans had recently gone through some scandals. But he's now been indicted for having paid some $1.7 million in hush money to the alleged victim of his sexual misconduct when he was a high school teacher and a wrestling coach. I cannot imagine the fear that must have been in that man's mind for all those years. He must have been in constant concern about that old skeleton being dragged out of the closet. But today, I mean, who among us would not be scared blue if we faced a federal indictment, possible jail time, having to spend a huge amount of money on lawyers, and humiliation, just loss of reputation, and all the perks that fame and political power brought him for so many years? All gone, gone. That's pain. All the fears came home to roost. Now, there are a lot of experts who talk about this and come up with a list of the things that people often fear. And on some lists, the number one fear that people have is public speaking. It's a pretty good thing it's not my number. But on other people's lists, it's flying, followed by heights, snakes, going to the dentist, spiders, and other creepy crawly things, insects. Some people fear change, enclosed spaces, mice, More ladies fear mice than gentlemen. The dark, death, failure, rejection, lightning and thunder. That scares a lot of people. Embarrassment. Some people are scared to death of dogs. And it goes on and on and on. Now, do any of those things speak to any of you? Some? Yeah. Yeah. Few, anyway. Most of us has most of us have something that truly bothers us. Yeah, I'll tell you, I do not like heights. That's my thing. But the worst thing about fear is that fear is the cause of so many bad decisions. Fear of what your friends might think. Fear of being different. Fear of ridicule. Fear of embarrassment or criticism. Fear of failure. Fear of lack. Or fear of change. Don't like change. Or fear of being hurt. And it goes on and on and on. Things that could prompt us to make very bad decisions. Even at best, fear could cheat you out of some very lovely experience, but at worst, it could cause some colossal mistakes in your life. However, if you look at fear through spiritual eyes, might be one of our greatest opportunities for spiritual progress. Ha! If just about everybody has some kind of fear, that some things that they avoid, maybe challenging that fear might be a spiritual lesson that we all, or at least most of us, would need to do and benefit from. Facing a fear is the way we discover, however, how much inner strength we have. Confronting something that's distasteful to us begins to demonstrate that we really do have a robust courage that we did not even suspect we had. And especially if we just dare to move past our comfort zones and move out of them into some of our discomfort zones by using our faith in God, in His omnipresent help, and in our faith in the inherent spiritual power within our own souls that is always helping us when we are open to it. Fear is going to be something that ceases to stop us or slow us down or prompt us to make bad mistakes. It will do that. Instead, it might turn around 180 degrees. A momentary fear might trigger exactly the opposite reaction. It might generate an immediate movement, a resolution to get over it, overcome it, shut this down right away. I mean, now. Face it. But that's getting a little bit ahead of myself, actually. Now, fear is nothing new. Um, People were fearful when they still lived in caves and when they came out of the caves, too. Humans have been experiencing fear since the dawn of the time, really. And certainly the people of the Bible knew all about fear. As a matter of fact, if you look up the word fear in a Bible concordance, you will find that book, in that book rather, this fear word, some books, many times, and certainly in almost every one of the 77 books of the Bible, you will find people talking about fear. If you look up the words fear not in the Bible or in the Bible concordance, you'll find that too in almost as many books in the Bible. And you know who the first person who said fear not? Who was that? It was God Himself, of course. Of course, from time to time, angels would appear and say that to people. Fear not, fear not. In the book of Genesis, Abraham has a vision where the Lord says to him, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. In other words, don't be afraid. I'm your shield. Well, not only did God say that to Abraham, but he also said it to Jacob and to Isaac, to Joseph, to Moses, to Joshua, that they should fear not. Fear not. Let it be a litany in your head. Fear not. He was with them. There was nothing to fear. And you know that same words are repeated to the prophets and to the kings, like Samuel and David and Ezekiel, Elijah, Daniel, and many others. And they in turn assured the Hebrew people that the Lord was with them. There was nothing to fear. That's a powerful commandment. Powerful. Fear not. It's found throughout the Old Testament because God's help, God's assurance, his presence is there for them at all times. Now, nothing changes in the New Testament. The angel Gabriel gives exactly that same message. Do not fear. To Zacharias first, and then Mary, and then Joseph, and then to the shepherds. Same words. And what comes out of Jesus' mouth? Again, fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. And what is the kingdom? It's the awareness of God within and all around us. That assurance. It didn't stop with Jesus. Oh, no. Paul carried the same message right on. In his second letter to Timothy, he says, and this is the Lanza translation, for God has not given us the spirit of fear. It's a very familiar one. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of good discipline. Huh? Now, most of the translations say, and of a sound mind, but of good discipline, does Dr. Lamsa say. And that is so much better a translation. It makes so much more sense. Good discipline. Yeah. And it's a very important clue in helping us overcome fears. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit more about this, but first, nuts and bolts. How do we rid ourselves of fear? How? Especially a fear that just regularly impacts our lives in a negative way. Well, first, we identify it. We look at it hard and say what it is, instead of letting it just be a bad feeling or be somewhere in the back of our minds. We look at it. This is what really disturbs me. And then we write it down. Put it on a piece of paper. Put it on a big piece of paper. Then we need to ask ourselves questions like, well, how did I get this? I mean, was it a bad childhood experience, or was it something that I don't know, it just developed? Maybe I've always had it. Where did it come from? What triggers it? That's a biggie. We have to ask ourselves that question. What triggers the fear? Does it affect my behavior? Does it affect my decisions? Is it limiting to my life? What is my gut feeling about this fear? That needs to be written down. That's why I need a big piece of paper. Where it came from, what it's all about, what started, what triggers it, what really down in my gut makes me react to it. The more fear affects any one of us, the more critical it is to reduce or eliminate it. And the very best way to do that is by starting to write it down. Then if it's in black and white, we can cope with it. It doesn't just float around in our heads in an amorphous way. There it is. As I said at the beginning, actually, it might be a good idea to ask ourselves, what's the worst thing that could happen? What is the very worst? And think it through. And so often we'll find, well, it wouldn't be all that terrible. It's not going to kill me, certainly. If you realize that it really is not going to damage your life, you could well come out proud if you did it. So maybe try it in a small way, maybe, but try it. Try to overcome that fear. Sometimes directly confronting a person or a situation that really makes you uncomfortable in an even measured way, not yelling or anything like that, but in a level and understandable way, is confronting them will absolutely vanquish a fear of that person or that situation. Also, consider this. Even if you failed at something that you had feared, and you failed in trying to overcome it, and it wouldn't make very much difference if you did fail at it, try it. Try it anyway. If and when there are setbacks, though, we have to stay firmly determined to persevere in overcoming any fears that impact our lives in a negative way. And certainly the most powerful way to overcome pardon, to overcome a fear is to have a very different mindset, to look at it, through new eyes. And we can listen very carefully to Paul's words, and they're in Romans 13, and I love the Phillips translation because it provides a different kind of mindset for us. Listen to what he says. You were not meant to relapse into the old slavish attitude of fear. You have been adopted into the very family circle of God. And you can say with a full heart, Abba, Father, my Father. The Spirit Himself endorses our inward conviction that we really are the children of God. Think what that means. If we are His children, then we are God's heirs. And all that Christ inherits will belong to all of us as well. Wow. Paul sees clearly, and what he's emphasizing is our basic divine nature. We are part of God's family, and everything that Jesus Christ received from God, we got as well. We are part of the royal family of God, and that is an eternal family. And as the little boy said, God made me, and God don't make junk. We are His handiwork. And our basic spiritual nature abounds with power and grace and wisdom because God's nature is power and grace and wisdom, and we are His image. Our basic spiritual nature is fearless. That's not part of us. We have no need or use for these self-limiting, self-created human fears. When we affirm and insist within ourselves on the truth of our spiritual nature, the image of God within us, we are absolutely certain that we can overcome every and any spiritual, or rather limiting fear. We can kick it out of our lives. God did not give us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love, and as Dr. Lamsa says, good discipline. We use good mental discipline by asking ourselves, well, what the heck do I fear? And making it clear to ourselves. How did I get this? Maybe it's ancient. But what triggers it? What makes me feel this way? Does it affect my behavior? Does it, dear God? Hope it doesn't, but does it affect my decisions? Does it limit me? What's my gut reaction to it? Those are powerful, important questions. And we need to write them down so they are right there in black and white in front of us. And then we use that God-given mental discipline to assure ourselves that this fear is a spiritual opportunity. And I am overcoming it. Fearless or fearful? As the individualized expression of God, you are fearless.